just a quiet old man at the shooting range, until the SEAL recruit spotted his tattoo. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The shooting range opened at 7 a.m., but the gravel under lane 7 always echoed with footsteps 15 minutes earlier. Samuel Walker never arrived late, never brought company, and never said more than he needed to. The old man walked with purpose, slow but deliberate, like every step had been practiced years ago and simply never changed. Faded denim jeans, brown flannel shirt rolled to his elbows. A tan ball cap shadowed most of his silver-white hair, its brim curved just enough to shield his eyes. No patches, no rank, no words. In one hand, he carried a worn canvas range bag, sagging with the weight of a single .45 caliber pistol and a box of 30 rounds. In the other, a battered green thermos that had been dented, repainted, and dented again. He never stayed longer than an hour, never shot more than he needed to, and never missed. The staff called him Sam. The younger guys called him Pops or Flannel. Most thought he was just another old vet living off a pension and chasing old ghosts with brass casings. They'd chuckle about his gear, his silence, his old-school shooting stance. He never responded, just nodded politely, stepped to lane 7, and began the same ritual. Load, breathe, shoot, reset. But there was something different about him, something the seasoned instructors noticed. It wasn't just the accuracy. It was the rhythm, the control, the stillness between each shot, as if he wasn't firing at a paper silhouette, but at memories. That Thursday morning, the range was unusually loud. A group of off-duty Navy recruits had taken the middle lanes, full of confidence, tattoos, and jokes. One of them, tall, lean, sharp-eyed, was Jared, a SEAL trainee, on leave before his next phase in Coronado. Jared was the only one who noticed the grouping on Sam's target. Tight, unforgiving. He was the only one who recognized the stance. Weight slightly forward, arms locked but relaxed, breathing synced with recoil. And then he saw it. As Sam reached to reload, the sleeve of his flannel shifted, just enough to reveal a faded tattoo on his forearm. It wasn't ornate. It wasn't new. But Jared froze. It was the emblem of Marine 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. Not the modern version. The old one. The kind inked in country. The kind you earned after surviving what most didn't. Jared turned, stared, and took a quiet step closer. The noise behind him dulled. His voice dropped. "Excuse me, sir. That ink, is that 1st Recon?" Sam didn't answer right away. He emptied the magazine with a steady hand, locked the slide, and finally looked up. His eyes, gray, unreadable, met Jared's. "Once," he said, just one word, but it hit like thunder. The laughter in the background softened. Jared stood straighter. He'd heard stories of deep ops in Laos, black radio missions, men who carried ghosts more than gear. Some never came home. Some came back and never spoke again. But all of them had one thing in common. They never bragged. Jared nodded slowly. Sam returned the nod, then turned back to his lane, raised the pistol, fired 3 shots, each at center mass. And from that moment, Jared knew. The man in lane 7 wasn't just practicing. He was remembering. Later that day, as the sun tilted low and the lanes began to clear, Jared approached again. He didn't ask for a story, didn't pry, just stood nearby, respectful. Sam, done with his rounds, pulled a coin from the side pocket of his range bag and handed it over. It was heavy, old, engraved with a unit crest and 2 words. "Still here." Jared looked down at it, stunned. When he looked up, Sam was already walking toward the parking lot, bag in hand, thermos swinging. No farewell, just that same silent rhythm. And somehow, it said more than any salute ever could. When respect awakens, a coin, a legacy. The coin weighed heavier in Jared's palm than its size suggested. Solid brass, aged with time and fingerprint oils, the emblem of 1st Recon engraved with a precision that hadn't come from any tourist shop. On the reverse side, 2 words etched in weathered capital letters. "Still here." Jared didn't ask questions when Sam handed it to him. The old man had simply placed it into his hand with no explanation, no ceremony, and walked away like he was just leaving behind a paper cup. But that night, Under the dim glow of a desk lamp in his barracks room, Jared couldn't let it go. He turned the coin over and over between his fingers, heart thudding. The insignia was real, rare, reserved only for those who had earned it the hardest way. And those two words weren't boastful. They were the kind of quiet declaration only a survivor could make, not of war, but of everything that came after. Jared opened his laptop. He knew where to look. A string of declassified documents, obscure Marine unit logs, and PDF scans long since forgotten by public eyes. It took hours. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m. He dug through digital dust and ghosted reports until one small, redacted line struck him like a rifle crack. Staff SGT. Samuel Walker, March 6, 1971. Laos. Extraction under fire. 7 recovered. Refused medevac. Sustained injury. Award declined. Record archived. Asset considered irreplaceable. Now silent. Now silent. That phrase sat in Jared's chest like stone. He read it again and again, not because he didn't understand it, but because he did. Perfectly. Sam Walker wasn't a man who had stories to tell. He was a man who had become the stories others whispered about. The kind of man you met once and never forgot. The following week, the range opened as usual. But something had changed. Jared arrived early. Earlier than usual. He wasn't alone. 3 of his teammates, Petty, Ramos, and Collins, came with him. They didn't talk much on the drive. They didn't have to. Word had traveled quietly. The man in lane 7 wasn't just a quiet old-timer. He was a piece of living history. And, somehow, that made every step across the gravel field different. When Sam arrived, right on time at 6:45, the range already had a presence waiting for him. He didn't stop, didn't ask, just nodded, passed by Jared and the others, and made his way to lane 7. But he noticed the silence, the posture, the way the boys, so full of swagger just a week before, stood a little straighter, handled their gear with a bit more care. Sam unpacked the same way as always. Set the thermos down first, then the pistol case, then the ammo box, 30 rounds. No more, no less. Jared watched it all from a respectful distance, then stepped forward slowly, holding out a new, sealed box of .45 ACP. Thought maybe today, Jared said, voice steady. 30 rounds wouldn't be enough. Sam looked at him, not with surprise, not with sentiment, just with the quiet measure of a man who didn't need to speak to be understood. After a long pause, Sam gave a slow, deliberate nod. He took the box. Not a thank you, not a smile, but it was the loudest acceptance Jared had ever received. The shooting that morning was different. Lane 7 carried the same rhythm as always, but now it felt like an echo chamber of reverence. Jared and the others didn't mimic Sam's style. They didn't dare, but they watched closely, every motion, every stance. At some point, even the casual shooters near lanes 2 and 3 stopped joking. Something had shifted in the air, like a flag being raised before a ceremony. A kind of shared recognition. Sam fired each round with the same deliberate cadence, grouping as tight as ever. Jared imagined each bullet carrying not just skill, but memory, maybe even a name. Later, when the brass had cooled and the targets were reeled in, Sam sat on the bench outside the building, sipping from his dented thermos. Jared approached again, slower this time. He didn't hold the coin, didn't ask for more. I looked it up, Jared said softly. Laos, March 6th, 7 men. You were wounded. You stayed. Sam didn't respond at first, just wiped the lid of his thermos with his sleeve, then finally said, files leave things out. Jared nodded. They left out your name, but not the weight. Sam looked at him fully then, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in evaluation. Then he said something Jared wouldn't forget for the rest of his life. Metals rust, but memory doesn't. That's why we stay quiet. Not to forget, to protect it. Jared stood still, every muscle locked in place like he'd just been given marching orders from a ghost. From behind them, Petty slowly approached. No swagger this time, just a kid who'd seen something he didn't understand until now. Sir, he asked, uncertain, why don't you ever talk about it? I mean, you could teach us all something. Sam's gaze returned to the range. I do, he said. Every Thursday. Lane 7. 30 shots. That's the story. And then he stood, packed up, nodded once more. Before he walked away, Jared reached out, placing his own challenge coin, bright and new, in Sam's hand. To earn what you already carry. Sam looked down at the coin, then at Jared. You don't earn this, he said, lifting the first recon token slightly. You survive it. And then, without another word, he left. That afternoon, the staff at the range screwed a brass plate into the edge of Lane 7. Reserved until he says otherwise. No name, no rank, just the silence of understanding. Sam never mentioned it, but he never used another lane again. The teacher without a podium, when presence speaks louder than words. Sam never spoke much. Not in greetings, not in goodbyes, and especially not about himself. But every Thursday, Lane 7 became a classroom. And though there was no blackboard, no syllabus, and certainly no lectures, lessons were taught with every deliberate motion he made. The young men began to arrive earlier. Not because they were told to, but because they didn't want to miss a second of it. The transformation was subtle. One week, Jared started using masking tape to mark his stance. Another, Colin stayed behind to ask the range officer about trigger discipline. Petty, once the most talkative of the group, began spending longer moments simply watching Sam reload. How he checked the magazine's base, the slide tension, the way his breathing matched his movements. None of them asked direct questions anymore. They didn't have to. Sam's every gesture answered what they hadn't yet found words to ask. At some point, the usual chatter at the range began to fade. The speaker system that once blasted classic rock in the mornings went quiet around 7 a.m. The front desk clerk said it was due to a wiring issue, but no one seemed interested in fixing it, and no one dared take Lane 7. Even when Sam arrived a few minutes late one Thursday, the stall remained untouched. A quiet understanding had settled into the bones of the place. That's when the plaque appeared. It was a Thursday like any other. Sam showed up at 6:45, signed in with his usual deliberate scrawl, walked toward the far end of the range. But when he reached his lane, he paused. Screwed just above the bench, on the wall where range rules used to be taped, was a new brass plate. Simple, polished, and no larger than a business card. It read, "Reserved, until he says otherwise." He looked at it for a long time. Didn't touch it. Didn't smile. Just removed his thermos from a bag, set it on the wooden bench, and went about his routine. But Jared saw the pause, and that was enough. The following week, something else changed. A young woman in civilian clothing waited near the parking lot. Her posture was military. High shoulders, square back, boots that had seen wear. She introduced herself as Sergeant Lila Moore, a local recruiter. About a group of young enlistees, she explained. They're not here to fire today. Just watch. If that's all right. The range officer nodded. Just be respectful. Lane 7's in session. She understood. They all did. As the weeks went by, the silent circle around Sam grew. Not a crowd, just a quiet assembly. Sometimes one or two recruits. Sometimes none. But even on rainy days when brass clinked against damp concrete, someone always stood just out of the way, watching Sam work. He never addressed them, never offered to teach. But after each session, someone walked away changed. Petty, for one, stopped trying to win every bet at the range. He started carrying a small notebook. Ramos began helping the range staff clean up without being asked. Jared took to writing quotes he overheard from Sam, not spoken out loud, but gathered through inference and action. He once wrote, "Your grip reveals more than your words." Another week, some shots aren't meant to land, just to measure who you are. None of it came from Sam's mouth, but somehow it all came from him. One Thursday morning, as Sam adjusted his target at the 25-yard line, a young man named Cooper, barely 19, fresh from basic, approached and hesitated at the edge of the booth. Sam didn't turn. Cooper cleared his throat. "Sir, I wanted to say, I think my dad served with someone like you, back in Vietnam. He doesn't talk about it either, but he watches the door every night, like he's waiting for someone who never came back." Sam paused mid-motion. His hands stilled. Then, without a word, he reached into his range bag and pulled out a single patch. Faded, barely legible. It had once been sewn onto a uniform, long since gone. He handed it to the kid. Tell him someone else still checks the door too. And that was all he said. Cooper swallowed hard, eyes stinging. He took the patch like it was made of gold. That moment rippled through everyone there. The range staff began posting new rules. Nothing formal, just a bulletin near the front desk. Respect, silence, observe, learn. Some thought it was just a note for better etiquette. But those who had stood near Lane 7 knew better. It was doctrine. That winter, Sam didn't come for 2 weeks. It snowed hard. Roads froze. The benches collected frost. People asked where he was. Some worried. But on the third Thursday, just as dawn broke over the ridge, a brown truck pulled into the gravel lot. Slow, deliberate, predictable. Sam stepped out. Flannel shirt, same boots, same thermos. And as he passed through the doors, 10 people, young and old, enlisted and retired, rose from their places. No one said a word, but each gave a nod. He returned at once. Just once. That day, a local newspaper journalist happened to be doing a piece on the range's safety improvements. He spotted Sam, saw the hush around Lane 7, and asked the range officer, "Who's the old man?" The officer replied, That's the guy who teaches everyone here how to shoot," without saying a single thing. The article never ran, but the journalist left behind a note at the front desk. Some legacies. Can't be printed. Only lived. It was pinned on the corkboard, just below the brass plaque at Lane 7. Sam never changed. Still 30 rounds. Still the same stance. Still the silence that spoke more clearly than any speech. But everyone else changed around him. And somehow, without trying, he'd become the most important instructor the range never hired. The teacher without a podium. The man whose presence was the curriculum. And week after week, the class kept growing. Because no matter what generation walked through those doors, they all seemed to understand one thing. When Sam Walker lifted his pistol, time slowed down. Not because of nostalgia, but because truth always demands attention. And Sam was full of it, quiet, steady, and unshakable. A relic? No, a compass. The one that always pointed back to something we were in danger of forgetting. Honor, discipline, quiet strength. The kind that never goes out of style and never stops teaching, even when it says nothing at all. It didn't take long for the story of Sam Walker to ripple beyond the weathered wooden lanes of the shooting range. But it didn't come through the news, not through interviews or viral videos or brass-laden ceremonies. It moved differently, quieter, like the morning frost retreating from the asphalt, unnoticed until everything felt cooler. It began with a boy, 12 years old, red hoodie, nervous hands. His name was Mason, and his father, a former Marine, had passed 2 years earlier. His mother had brought him to the range on a Saturday morning. He just wants to feel close to his dad again, she explained softly to the front desk clerk. He was too young to shoot, but she asked if he could at least watch from the benches. The clerk hesitated, then looked toward Lane 7. Sam was there. Same flannel, same rhythm. The clerk nodded. As long as he's quiet. Mason sat alone at the far end. Backpack hugged close. At first, he watched everyone, but gradually his gaze anchored to Sam. He didn't blink when Sam stepped in a stance. He leaned forward every time the older man reloaded, as if trying to memorize the motion. By the time Sam packed up and left, Mason hadn't moved in over an hour. The next week, he came earlier, and the week after that, he brought a notebook. He never spoke to Sam. Not yet, but he watched and learned. One Thursday afternoon, after most lanes had cleared and the brass lay scattered across the concrete, a young officer approached Sam. His name was Ryan Lattimore. Clean cut, 25, fresh out of the academy. He waited until Sam had holstered his pistol. "Sir," Ryan said, cautious but sincere. "Can I ask something?" Sam turned. Ryan took a breath. "How do you stay calm when you're misunderstood? When someone's got the wrong idea about you, how do you not react?" Sam looked at him for a long moment. Then, without changing his tone, he replied, "Deep breath. Steady hands. Where the bullet goes depends more on your heart than your trigger finger." Ryan didn't say another word, but he wrote that sentence down in his phone. He still reads it before every shift. The changes weren't dramatic, but they were unmistakable. The range quieted in the mornings, not from rules but reverence. More young men came early, not to fire, just to observe. A local veteran named Clarence brought his teenage granddaughter, Harper. She didn't care much for firearms, but she sat beside Mason on the bench. "Watch how he breathes," Mason whispered, "like he's sinking with the wind." She didn't roll her eyes. She just nodded. One Saturday, a man in his 40s showed up in jeans and a sheriff's department hoodie. His name was Pete Alvarez. He watched from his car for 20 minutes before entering. When he finally approached Sam's lane, he didn't bring a weapon, just a photo. It was faded and creased. Two young Marines in the jungle. One of them was Sam. The other was Pete's father. "He never told me your name," Pete said, "but he used to say, 'There was a man who walked out with me when nobody thought we'd make it.' I think that was you." Sam looked at the photo, held it, then returned it. "You look like him around the eyes," he said quietly. That was all. But Pete walked out wiping tears from his face. No one asked Sam to speak at the town hall. No one invited him to headline a seminar. Yet slowly, veterans and rookies, teenagers and widows, mechanics and teachers, all began finding reasons to be near Lane 7. Not to shoot, to sit, to listen, even if nothing was being said. At a nearby high school, a civics teacher named Mr. Lawrence gave a surprise assignment. Write about someone in your town who never sought praise, but made you stop and think. Over half the class wrote about Sam Walker. One student submitted a drawing of Lane 7. Under it, she wrote, "He never spoke in class, but he taught us anyway." At a small-town gas station, a clerk whispered to a customer, "You know that old guy with the thermos?" One nod from him feels like you've earned something real. And in the barber shop, old men began telling younger ones, "Quiet people ain't quiet 'cause they got nothing to say. Sometimes it's because they've seen too much." The ripple spread without force. A mechanic started leaving thank you cards in customers' cars. A waitress began learning the names of the Vietnam vets who came in alone. A high schooler began helping his neighbor take the trash out, just because nobody told them to do it. But watching Sam, they learned, you don't need to be loud to lead. You don't need a spotlight to be seen. And sometimes, the loudest message is a steady hand in a noisy world. One evening, Mason finally approached Sam. His voice cracked. "Mr. Walker, can I ask, did you ever miss?" Sam considered the question, then looked him straight in the eye. "Plenty, but not once when it mattered." Mason smiled, not because the answer was perfect, but because it was honest. Some people teach with textbooks, some with sermons. Sam taught with his presence, and more people were beginning to listen. Not because he raised his voice, but because in a world full of noise, his silence felt like something you could trust. And in that silence, something was healing. Something was being passed on. One breath, one glance, one lesson at a time. The flag that never came down, when a legacy is just a nod. That morning, the air turned cold earlier than usual. There was the taste of autumn, dry, crisp, and tinged with a quiet longing. The shooting range opened at 7 o'clock, but Samuel Walker had been arriving at 6:45 every morning, without fail. His boots crunched softly on the gravel path for the parking lot to the range, each step echoing the countless miles he'd walked on faraway soils long ago. Something felt different that day. Jared was already there, standing silently at the end of the hall. No gun in hand, not shooting, not speaking, just standing, as if waiting for some unspoken ritual to begin. When Sam walked in, Jared nodded. Sam nodded back, the same way he always did, and made his way to Lane 7. But as he passed, others began to rise. No one told him to. No orders were given. When the first person stood, the rest understood they should too. In a single breath of silence, the firing lane became sacred. Not because of the sound of bullets, but because of the presence of someone who didn't shoot to prove anything, but to remember something. Sam didn't glance at anyone. He set up his target, placed his old thermos down, drew his Colt .45, and began. The first 3 shots, perfectly precise. His back straight, his eyes unwavering, his breathing so steady it seemed non-existent. After the third volley, a young boy who had just arrived whispered to Jared, "Why is no one saying anything?" Jared answered softly, "You don't need words when the respect is deep enough to keep everyone quiet." When the 30th shot rang out, Sam gently set the pistol down. He cleaned each part with quiet care, packed it away, picked up his thermos, and walked off the lane. Everyone remained standing, and as he passed by, each person gave a nod, not because Sam asked for it, but because something in them said they should. Sam said nothing. He only nodded in return, as if that was the only way to say thank you without making anyone feel awkward. A week later, Jared arrived earlier than usual. He held something in his hands, a small bronze plaque etched with a simple line. Some heroes don't stop serving. They just serve differently. He asked the range manager if he could mount it to the wooden post next to Lane 7. No one objected. In fact, the manager smiled, patted Jared on the back, and stepped aside to let him do it himself. When the plaque went up, no one took photos. No one live-streamed. But from that day forward, everyone who walked into the range noticed it. The plaque didn't mention a name, no rank, no medals, but every line felt like it had been engraved into the soul of anyone who had ever worn the uniform or loved someone who had. An old officer sitting quietly on the bench nearby murmured, "That little sign, it's enough to make me come back after 10 years." The young boy who had once questioned Jared returned, this time with his father, a hard-looking man whose eyes grew misty as he read the plaque. "He's just like my dad," he whispered. "Never talked about it, but now I get it." From that day on, no one ever occupied Lane 7 without asking, even though Sam never claimed it, even though he never said a word. Everyone just knew it belonged to a certain kind of man, the kind whose service couldn't be copied, only honored. A month later, a group of new recruits visited the range for orientation. The instructor pointed toward Lane 7. "Sit still," he said, voice low. "Watch that man. That's how a soldier shoots." One of the recruits asked, "What's his name?" The instructor just shrugged. "You don't need his name. You just need to remember the way he stands." That evening, in a small wooden house at the edge of town, Sam poured himself another cup of tea. Ellie, his wife, folded napkins beside him. "Someone new watching you shoot again?" she asked, a smile in her voice. Sam chuckled softly, didn't answer. He simply looked out the window, where an old flag still waved gently on the porch. Not torn, not faded, still there. "There's still work to do," he murmured. And the next morning, he rose early once more, walked the familiar path. 6:45 sharp, just like every year before. And everyone stood, not to salute a man, but to honor a legacy that never asked to be named. In a noisy world, silence becomes the most honorable voice. Today, we live in a world flooded with noise, social media, news alerts, public debates. But there's a certain kind of person who never steps up to a podium, never demands recognition, and still leaves an unmistakable mark. People like Sam. He never lectured from a stage. He never told war stories. Yet, through the way he walked, the way he cleaned his firearm, the way he nodded at just the right moment, he taught an entire generation about respect, perseverance, and how to live without needing to show off. In our daily lives, we often measure others by appearance, titles, or flashy accomplishments. But Sam's story reminds us, true dignity is revealed in how you live, especially when no one's watching. To older adults, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you pass on. Many people, after retirement, feel forgotten, as if their value ended the day they left the workplace. But Sam wasn't trying to prove anything. Quietly, he kept showing up at the range each week, living with kindness and steadfast principle. And then, one day, that very silence stirred an entire community. No social media, no speeches. Just by showing up, Sam reached young shooters, police officers, and boys who'd never known war. The lesson? Older adults can still serve, not on battlefields, but in everyday life, through patience, kindness, and simply being a living example of what's right. Still here, a quiet message for all of us. Those words, engraved on the coin Sam gave to Jared, still here, weren't just a statement of survival. They were a declaration, I'm still here, and I still matter. In today's world, older people are too often pushed to the margins. But this story reminds us, the presence of those who've lived through life's trials is a treasure for the next generation. And we, the ones lucky enough to live among them, must relearn how to listen, observe, and cherish the real-life Sam Walkers around us. Take a moment to notice the quiet ones near you. The elderly neighbor who waters his plants like clockwork, the retired mechanic who still fixes bikes down the street, or the older woman who folds the flag every morning at the Veterans Hall. They may not tell their stories, but if you ask, with respect and sincerity, you'll learn more than any book could ever teach you. Because, as Sam once said, you don't teach this, you absorb it. And if you're someone who has lived through hardship, who's seen war, or simply endured the battles of ordinary life, remember this. The flag you've carried your whole life doesn't need to fly high. It only needs not to fall. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.